Last time we covered the best starter Pokemon in every generation, taking into account typings, moveset, stats, and how well they fare against the gyms of that region. But this time, we're gonna switch it up, offend some people's childhoods, and take a look at the worst starter Pokemon in every region, starting with Kanto. The Kanto region is where it all began in the first starter trio on this list, Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. Now, I want to start off by saying that all three of these are solid choices and are powerhouses in their own respective areas. And because of this, the worst starter Pokemon is not actually going to be one of the original trio, but instead Pikachu. That's right, the face of the Pokemon Company is the worst starter in Kanto. Its stats are nothing special and makes the first gym that much more difficult in Pokemon Yellow and doesn't really make up for it for mini gym battles following. Pikachu also doesn't really learn helpful moves like Iron Tail until later generations, and doesn't really excel in any particular aspect compared to the other three starters. And outside of being the best chunky boy, he lacks overall utility. Gonna have to be my worst pick for Gen 1. Moving along to Generation 2, Johto harbors the starter trio of Cyndaquil, Chikorita, and Totodile. Alright, let's be honest, most of us already know that one of the worst starters of all time already comes from Generation 2, and that's unfortunately Chikorita. Being a grass type makes almost every single gym in Johto a grind. Not only that, but Chikorita has access to one of the worst move pools, and none of Meganium's stats reach or exceed 100 outside of its special defense, which really is a shame because Meganium in of itself is actually a really useful final evolution, just not in Johto. I also want to point out that it does have quite a bit of utility in the post game of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but that's not going to be enough to drag it out of the #1 worst starter spot for Johto. Now, Generation 3 gives us a starter trio powerhouse with Torchic, Mudkip, and Trico. Now, this is a region where all three starters are excellent choices, and depending on if you're playing Ruby and Sapphire or Emerald, your pick for which starter Pokemon would change as a few of the main series battles differ. However, my overall pick for the worst starter in the region is unfortunately gonna have to be my boy Trico. He starts out great against early game gyms, and in Emerald has high utility against the water type champion Wallace. However, as we enter that mid to late game and take on the fire and flying type gym leaders, Trico's evolutionary line starts running into some trouble. Also, his stab move Leaf Blade caps out at 70 power and gets outclassed by the end of the game compared to Swampert's Waterfall or Blaziken's Low Kick. Now, Generation 4 is my all-time favorite region, harboring the starter trio of Piplup, Chimchar, and Turtwig. Now, this one was really hard to decide on because there's a good argument for really any of the three starters. Each has a wide range of utility, and depending on your playstyle, the answer could change. But unfortunately, I'm gonna have to pick my favorite out of the three, being Piplup, as the worst starter in Sinnoh. This is because Piplup has the least amount of advantages when it comes to gym typings in the region compared to the other two, and to be honest, there are a lot of really good water type Pokemon that are accessible to you throughout your gameplay in Sinnoh, compared to Chimchar, which actually you only have a small pool of fire types to choose from a majority of the game. Antoinette from the future here. #1, do you guys like my new Pokemon Center t-shirt? It's got a little Pikachu in the pocket. I love him. Guys, if you're enjoying this Pokemon related content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment down below what ranking you want us to do next. All right, enough chit chat. Back to the video. Now, Generation 5 is going to drop us into the Unova region and gives us a starter trio of Tepig, Snivy, and Oshawott. Now, this region has quite a unique answer on which starter would be considered the worst, as gameplay significantly changes depending on if we're talking about Black and White 1 or Black and White 2. So for this argument, we are going to look at the first main series games. By the way, if you want to see which starter Pokemon I thought were the best in every region, don't forget to click on the video down in the description after this one. Some of my choices may surprise you. But back to the worst starter, and in my opinion, that's going to have to be Snivy. It really looks like Pokemon does not like their grass type starters. Snivy's evolutionary move pool is frankly garbage, and anything outside of its speed stat is below average. Next on this list is the Kalos region, introducing Froakie, Fennekin, and Chespin to the starter trio. So I'm gonna be honest with you all, figuring out the worst starter in Pokemon X and Y has been incredibly difficult. After doing some research for this video, I found that all three starters were relatively good choices, and the decision was made even harder by the fact that you get access to a second starter Pokemon through your Kalos playthrough. And so the answer got even more complicated as you started looking at which pairing worked best together. I think I'm gonna have to go with the pairing of Chestnut and Blastoise, or maybe even Chestnut and Venusaur, but even then I'm saying that with uncertainty. To be honest, I almost feel like leaving it up to the comment section on this one and decide on the worst starter duo in Pokemon X and Y. Next on this list is the beautiful island paradise of the Alola region with the starter trio of Rowlet, Popplio, and Litten. In our last video, we went over how one of the least popular of the 3 starters ended up being my strongest pick for tackling the region. But today, we're going to continue the pattern of grass-type starters taking up the rear, as my choice for the worst starter in Alola is going to have to be Rowlet. Outside of your matches against Hau, Rowlet doesn't have many advantages against the other Kahunas or main game battles. He also tends to learn moves like Shadow Sneak and Phantom Force way later, around the time of the Elite Four, and Decidueye only naturally learns one fighting move, which is Low Sweep, but luckily you do learn that before the second trial. There are even battles against Guzma's team that Decidueye does struggle a bit against compared to, let's say, Popplio, which is the best starter. And with Decidueye's mediocre 78 HP and 75 defense stat, it really doesn't weather super effective hits very well. And for all of these reasons, unfortunately, my boy Rowlet is the worst pick for Alola. Now, we finally made it to Generation 8, the Galar region, with a starter trio of Scorbunny, Sobble, and Grookey. Now, this UK-inspired region has the same issue as several other regions, where all 3 starters are great picks, but someone has to be last, and this time, it's gonna have to be Sobble. Now, I do want to say that its speed and physical attack stats do outclass the entire Scorbunny line, and it is surprisingly strong as a water-type attacker in Galar. However, it is quite the glass cannon, and ultimately loses out to Cinderace's Libero hidden ability. And finally, we are ending on the most recent Pokemon main series game, Scarlet and Violet. Now, I'm gonna be 100% with you guys. I did this in the last video where we looked at the best starter Pokemon in every region, but Scarlet and Violet is such an easy game, I honestly just say pick what you want. But for the sake of the argument, Quaxly is garbage.